One young soldier in the Easter Rising was a 25-year-old lad from Cork who was assigned the duty of guarding a stairway here in the GPO which led to the roof. He was committed to the cause, but even more committed to delivering the cause. Not to dying a martyr's death for freedom, but staying alive to achieve that freedom. His name was Michael Collins, and in my view, by any standard, he was Ireland's greatest. Five years after the GPO and the Easter Rising, the British government were offering Ireland a truce, a permanent peace treaty, and then an independent Irish state. None of this would have happened without one man, my man, Michael Collins. He showed bravery, he showed leadership, he showed genius throughout his short life. He was a man for all seasons, soldier, statesman, diplomat, financier, intelligence supremo, whatever it took, he gave it in order to achieve his only ambition in life, the freedom of his country. He was Ireland's George Washington. He was our Nelson Mandela. Like many heroes, Collins had modest beginnings. The youngest son of farming parents, he was born in 1890 between Clonakilty and Rosscarbery in West Cork. But by the turn of the century, Ireland was no country for young men, and in time it would be his turn to take the boat. By 1906, opportunities for bright youngsters were in short supply in West Cork, so when it was his time to go, Michael joined his sister Hanny at the heart of the empire in London. Like so many Irish men and women, Collins emigrated to London at the age of 16, and in the decade that followed, 1912 to 1922, he went from being a lumbering teenager to the powerhouse of Ireland's revolution. That's some decade. This is Blythe House in the centre of the city of London. It was here that Michael Collins joined his sister Hanny to work as a clerk in the Post Office Savings Bank. And it was here that he learned key administrative skills, accuracy and attention to detail, which were to serve him so well later on. His energy and ability soon brought him to the attention of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the IRB, for which the GAA was a natural recruiting ground. The Irish Republican Brotherhood, the original Fenians, were a secret army committed to the independent democratic Ireland that Collins dreamed of. For a young rebel looking for a cause, Collins and the IRB were made for each other. The matchmaker in all of this was another post office worker and GAA stalwart, Sam Maguire. Yes, that's Sam Maguire. He was part of a revitalised IRB in London, and he was on the lookout for the next generation of revolutionaries who might succeed where so many had failed before.
1916. The week-long rising ends with Dublin in flames, the rebel outpost cut off and forced to surrender. The Republican ideal seemed in ruins.
It was a complete stunning surprise when it exploded in '16. They swooped on everybody all over the country.
There had been deportations of thousands of people to English prisons and to detention camps in places like Frongoch in North Wales.
They bundled them all together in Frongoch. They were young, hungry, ardent, very energetic. The British have shot the other people and they've left probably the most dangerous single man alive.
Few then could have seen the threat posed by an obscure volunteer from West Cork, a survivor of the GPO, Michael Collins.
He was a great man. He never knew when he was beaten, nor did he miss an opportunity to learn from experience. And being a prisoner of war wouldn't change that. First at Stafford Prison and later at Frongoch in North Wales, Collins was a guest of His Majesty's government. Here he made contacts, friends and plans. Like many hundreds of his fellow volunteers, he enrolled in what was to become a Sinn Féin university. And if prison was a college for revolutionaries, Collins was to graduate top of the class. If you want the job done, give it to a busy man. Collins soon added key positions in the Volunteers, the IRB and Sinn Féin. Found himself a girlfriend, Kitty Kiernan. And when in 1918 Griffith and De Valera were sent back to jail, he found himself rising up the ranks. In 1918, Michael Collins is back here in his native County Cork, but this time standing as a Sinn Féin candidate in the Westminster general election. He wins the South Cork constituency by a landslide, and along with other Sinn Féin MPs, they decide not to take their seats in Westminster, but instead to form a rebel parliament in Dublin, the first Dáil. Winning 2/3 of the available seats, these members of the first Dáil had a mandate, and they were making a dangerously bold statement. They symbolised the democratic wish of the Irish people for independence, and they forced the British to face up to the fact that Ireland now wanted to go it alone. Not that the Empire was in any humour for giving in. In 1919, Eamon de Valera was in prison in England, and the decision was made to help him escape. Collins personally led a small party of volunteers to spring him from Lincoln jail. He could have delegated that task to others, but instead he chose to put his life on the line for the movement and for De Valera. It seems to me that that shows that he was an immensely brave man. And if greatness has anything to do with bravery, Michael Collins had it in spades. The British viewed the first Dáil as a mere upstart, but De Valera, Collins and everybody else in it took it very seriously indeed. If their alternative to Westminster was to succeed, it needed money, lots of it. It fell to the new 29-year-old Minister for Finance to raise that money. The aim was to bring in £500,000, half in Ireland, half overseas. Collins set about raising a bond issue. 1916 veterans, their families, and Dáil TDs, including my grandfather, were among the first subscribers. With funds also flowing in from Eamon de Valera's efforts in America, it soon became a massive success. Collins alone raised £500,000 for the new rebel government. It's one thing to raise £500,000 for an illegal republic. It's another thing completely to keep it safe and sound. And Collins used all his banking and organisational skills to keep it hidden in accounts across the country. The British government hired a resident magistrate called Alan Bell, and he started to trace where the money was being kept. Army and police raids began yielding evidence of where the money was going. Within months, Bell was issuing summonses to Collins's bankers. In return, Collins put his newly formed intelligence squad on Alan Bell's tail. Collins realised he had to act. So Bell was travelling on a tram in Dublin in broad daylight when 3 members of the squad dragged him from the tram and shot him 3 times in the head. Bell's assassination brought the financial investigation to an end. Shooting him was clinical and ruthless, but if the rebel government was to survive, it was necessary. Soldier, prisoner, politician, and now guerrilla leader and one of the Empire's most wanted men, Collins was always the man the revolution needed him to be. So here we are in Dublin Castle, the seat of British power in Ireland for 800 years. And in Collins' time, this was the place that Ireland was run by the largest empire in the world. And the simple fact about that empire was that it was a master of intelligence. And Collins knew that he couldn't get them out of Ireland if he couldn't beat them at the intelligence game. Knowledge was power, and Collins, by placing his agents and his spies within the castle, was determined to end their knowledge, and by doing so, to break their power. The decision to kill Alan Bell, Dublin Castle's financial investigator, was a demonstration of Collins' willingness, tactically and morally, to employ whatever was necessary to achieve the ultimate end, Irish freedom. But Michael Collins believed he had a mandate from the people to achieve that end. His campaign was a new kind of warfare, covert and calculated, ruthless but efficient. Collins was quite prepared to justify the use of violence in support of political aims, but he didn't believe in the use of violence as an end in itself or in the use of terror. And when it came to eliminating the force of G-men, the British intelligence officers located in this castle, even in their case he felt honour-bound to give them a sporting chance, in the sense that he gave them a warning to get the hell out of Ireland. A small group of highly motivated Dubliners, known as the Squad, carried out Collins's orders. And pubs like Cleary's on Amiens Street were among their safe houses. They came from ordinary working-class communities, and their loyalty to Collins was legendary.
I lay down my life for Collins at any time, and I think to me, a cheap price to pay. Without the brains of Collins and his men, we could never have got anywhere.
Collins didn't have it all his own way. There were people in the movement who wanted to confront the British in spectacular pitched battles. The Custom House behind me is the place where it all came to a head. On one afternoon, in a spectacular operation, the records of the British administration were burned to the ground. But the cost to the volunteers was 80 of their members captured. Collins knew that open warfare was not sustainable, and in the end it was his secret warfare strategy that won the day. Collins's squad was notorious, Collins himself the most wanted man in the empire. As a unit, they hit and they ran. They harassed and humiliated the British, driving them to the very brink. Before the Custom House debacle, at the height of his secret war, Michael Collins sent his squad out at dawn on a cold Sunday in 1920 to wipe out an entire network of British spies in one fell swoop. But it's the retaliation unleashed that afternoon in Croke Park that is imprinted in Irish history. British rule in Ireland was beginning to behave like a wounded, dying animal. Faced with a successful guerrilla campaign, their response was to unleash state terror. Burnings, reprisals, arrests, all of this played straight into Collins's hands. Michael Collins' guerrilla war was coming to its end game. When the bodies of soldiers killed in Ireland began returning to Britain in numbers, there was public outcry. Opinion turned against the war and against the government. Westminster finally took notice. The whole point of Collins' guerrilla war was to force the British to withdraw from Ireland. And he won his point. The Empire called a truce in July 1921. Collins knew that he hadn't the men and the resources to keep up the struggle indefinitely. And he also knew that one aspect of the truce was that he'd had to bring his secret army and organisation out into the open, to use his own phrase, like rabbits out of their burrows. So he knew very well that once these things had happened, there could be only one outcome, and that was a negotiated settlement. Eamon de Valera went to Downing Street to see what was on offer. Northern Ireland had already come into existence a year earlier with the Government of Ireland Act, so it was clear that he hadn't a prayer when it came to a 32-county independent republic, or any kind of republic. The only alternatives were a return to war or some form of compromise. Dev simply couldn't be seen to compromise on the ideal of the republic. But Collins was a pragmatist who did whatever Ireland needed whenever she needed it. And what Ireland needed now was a deal, a treaty, because the alternative was a return to a war that Michael Collins knew we couldn't win. The rest of the Irish negotiating team, Griffith, Barton, Duggan and Gavin Duffy, headed to Hand's place in London ahead of Collins, who was busy getting engaged to Kitty Kiernan. But when Michael arrived independently in London a day later, there was nothing nostalgic about his return to a city he knew well. This time he knew he was about to enter the lion's den. Collins and his team stayed here at 15 Cadogan Gardens, now an exclusive primary school which numbers Prince Charles among its former pupils. Collins may have been negotiating a peace treaty, but he also remained the head of the IRB and director of intelligence. He needed privacy. He needed to stay in touch with his communications network. And above all, he needed to keep his options open in case the negotiations broke down. But he was committed to negotiate, and Michael Collins was about to show the same flair for talking as he had for fighting. This was the international news story of the day, and everyone wanted a part of its leading Irish player. Collins and the other delegates found themselves starting a game already 2 goals down. As far as the British were concerned, a united Ireland was out. An independent Irish Republic was also out. What was on offer was Dominion status, similar to Canada, independence, but within the British Commonwealth. Collins, the great revolutionary, the great guerrilla leader, had to become Ireland's greatest diplomat, and quickly. The truth is, Collins was now fighting on 2 fronts. In London, he was going face to face with Empire heavyweights like Lloyd George and Churchill. Back in Dublin, hardliners like Cathal Brugha and Austin Stack were threatening to split the cabinet by demanding total separation from the British Crown. As the storm clouds gathered, Collins, Griffith and the team needed all their skills to keep any hope of independence alive. On December 6, 1921, the deal was done. With no further room for manoeuvre, and Lloyd George threatening the resumption of an immediate and terrible war, Michael Collins and the Irish delegation put their signatures to the Anglo-Irish Treaty.
After years of bloodshed, a treaty was signed, and in Dublin, a new flag replaced the Union Jack.
The split was underway. The IRB endorsed the treaty, but De Valera and his supporters rejected it. Undaunted, Collins and Griffith took the democratic route, and they put the case for peace directly to the people's representatives in the Dáil. On Monday the 19th of December 1921, Michael Collins made one of the greatest Irish political speeches of all time, one that he would then take around the country and put in print. He rejected utterly the notion that he and the other signatories had exceeded their mandate. They certainly weren't bullied into signing the treaty by the British. And he reiterated eloquently his belief that the treaty was simply a stepping stone, a means to an end, when he said, "I do not recommend it for more than it is. Equally, I do not recommend it for less than it is. In my opinion, it gives us freedom. Not the ultimate freedom that all nations desire and develop to, but the freedom to achieve it." The country was... De Valera had resigned and Michael Collins was the head of the provisional government. That June, in the general election, effectively a referendum on the treaty, the people gave Collins an overwhelming endorsement.
Ireland, save the 6 counties of Ulster, had become the Irish Free State. Down came the barriers and barbed wire so long associated with British rule, and the Crown's forces marched out for good.
After 700 years, it was Michael Collins who began closing the door on British occupation. Now it was their turn to take the boat. The Irish were back in charge of their own destiny. But just as he had ended one war, another was looming. There were 2 armies in the state. One, the anti-treaty IRA, claiming to be the legitimate army of the Republic that wasn't to be. The other, Collins's National Army, the army of the new Free State. Former comrades, neighbours, brothers, sons and daughters now found themselves on opposing sides. Everything Michael Collins had devoted his life to was beginning to unravel. An anti-treaty garrison barricaded in the forecourts had been tolerated by Collins for months, as he made desperate behind-the-scenes efforts to reconcile old comrades. But with no compromise likely, Collins was balancing old loyalties with new democracy. Something had to give. The rebels kidnapped a Free State general. Then, rightly or not, they were also blamed for the assassination of Sir Henry Wilson in London. The British gave Collins an ultimatum: to get the IRA out of the forecourts, or they would.
So faced with this dilemma, he made the tough decision, and that was to clear the forecourts garrison himself.
Collins had also lost friends and comrades during the Civil War. His old pal, Harry Boland, who took the anti-treaty side, was shot dead on the 31st of July. And within 2 weeks, his treaty colleague and Dáil president, Arthur Griffith, died suddenly. Only days ahead of an even bigger funeral, Michael Collins led the Griffith cortege to Glasnevin, the final resting place for Ireland's greatest heroes. His father had predicted great things for Michael Collins, but it was a single bullet in a scrappy skirmish on a quiet back road that killed him.
They say that those who the gods love die young, and heroes often come to a tragic end. Michael Collins could have died in the 1916 Rising. He could have been gunned down by the G-men who hunted him across Ireland. He could have been assassinated at a great public event surrounding the treaty controversy. But instead, his death came here on a lonely country road in southwest Cork on the 22nd of August 1922. And with his death, Collins moved from history to legend.
So here we are at the last grave that we'll visit on the tour, and it's the final resting place of Michael Collins. As you can see by it, it's the most popular grave in the cemetery today. Every day of the year, people put flowers on his grave. I remember reading a book once, and it said if you want to be a hero, you need to be 5 things. You need to be young, charismatic, good-looking, intelligent, and dead. His epitaph is simplicity itself. It just says, "Here lies Michael Collins. May God give everlasting peace to his soul." So, the last resting place of Michael Collins.